Now, I'm not somebody who wants to talk 100% of the time about drama on my channel. In fact, I do have other topics I want to cover that aren't based on YouTube in any way. Now, this isn't a video I plan to make, but it hits toward subject matter that I hold in great passion. So that being said, let's jump right into this video. The subject matter of this video pertains to film and media, with the main selling point being originality. A lot of people believe that because something is unoriginal, it is automatically bad. This isn't the case. All stories to some extent have already been told time and time again. However, it's how you tell these stories that matter. How can you put your own fresh spin on a plot that has been already done time and time again? There is, of course, the opposite end where people don't seem to realize why something is unoriginal, missing the point entirely, or has really bad hot takes. Enter Deviant Crow, a female commentator who made a video about originality in cinema. Granted, she mostly talked about the Disney remakes, but that's besides the point. However, she seems to not understand a few things about originality, or even why certain things are considered bad or unoriginal. Her video entitled Originality Isn't Important censored. What the fuck? This is the video we'll be covering today. The link to Deviant Crow's video will be in the description below. Now let's get this show on the road.
And they use something they call pyroprocessing. The interesting thing is they call it pyroprocessing, but it's a molten salt process.
I might be the new host, but that doesn't mean I'm going to leave old traditions behind, like having a spicy hot take. That's right, it's time for a big old bag of spicy hot takes. Everyone take one.
Hot take. A piece of commentary typically produced quickly in response to a recent event whose primary purpose is to attract attention. Slight nitpick on my end, but you're not exactly making a hot take, but rather a subjective criticism, an opinion piece that relies heavily on personal preference. Considering how the rest of this video goes, I'd suggest keeping this in mind.
You know how you spot out a bad critic? If they say, oh, this plot isn't original, or this thing isn't original, therefore it's a bad.
While this kind of critique does exist, I specified this earlier in my video, this isn't the only kind of criticism that comes from unoriginality. Originality can be how a story is told. We've seen Romeo and Juliet before, and we'll continue to see it 100 times over. That doesn't mean that the story of two families at each other's throats, whilst two people, one from each family, fall in love with each other in secret, and ultimately ending in some kind of tragedy, can't be retold in a different way or unique way. An example of the same story told a different way is James Cameron's Titanic. Again, it's a story of two people from different families falling in love and ending in tragedy, but instead of royal houses, it's a battle of the classes. The lower class Jack Dawson falling in love with the upper class Rose Dwight Bucarter, and whilst Rose has a family and is given to a rich man in marriage to keep her family financially stable, Jack is a street rat making his way in life. Both stories are at their core the same. But it's the way they are told that is different, and therefore original. Keep this point in mind for later.
Whether it's people complaining about a Disney remake that's not even out yet. I mean, to be fair, they're most likely going to be bland, but still, the movie hasn't come out yet, and there's always the slight chance that they could be good, or have some aspects that are better than the original that are worth talking about.
To be fair, the Disney remakes are at their core unchanged stories. They aren't the same plot type told differently. It takes the same movie and telling it the same way. Again, let's go back to my example of Romeo and Juliet compared to Titanic. Let's say, in a hypothetical situation, Titanic had two royal houses duking it out on board the ship, and then we get two different members of the royal houses falling in love before taking their own lives. Then the story would just be Romeo and Juliet, but some name changes here and there. Now, granted, this isn't taking into account stylistic choices in the filmmaking storytelling process or any additional factors. But now this brings us back to the Disney remakes. Bar a few movies, the biggest problem is that they aren't changing too much about the story. Some of these live-action remakes aren't being told any different. The Lion King 2019 is the same story as the original. The same goes for the 2017 Aladdin and the 2017 Beauty and the Beast, bar some odd additional choices that don't go anywhere or do anything like the magic teleporting book that's only used in one scene. The movie is still the same story. I bring these movies up because these are the examples used in Deviant Crows' video. Further additions to this point will most likely follow as we progress.
I mean, at least give credit to the Dumbo remake. At least they took out the blatant racism. Maybe do Peter Pan next.
You bring up the blatant racism, which is essentially a product of the film's time and can't exactly be helped. But that scene isn't an example of how the movie changed other than no more racism. While I never saw the live-action Dumbo, so I can't confirm nor deny that it is or isn't a more original take, considering the live-action Dumbo is a Tim Burton film and Tim Burton made quite a few remakes, or as he puts it, reimaginings, and the majority do have key differences from the source material. There are also movies he has made, while different, do still tell the same story over again. A good example of the former being his Alice in Wonderland remake. An example of the latter would be his Planet of the Apes remake. Whilst the Alice in Wonderland remake was a hero's journey type story where Alice is brought to Wonderland in hopes of saving it from the Red Queen, and in comparison to the Disney version, which is basically just Alice going from place to place in an adventure, with the end goal being getting back home. Burton's Planet of the Apes, like the original, is a story of a man trapped on a planet dominated by apes that the main character must escape from. With this in mind, the Dumbo remake, I'd say, is a 50-50 shot of being a complete remake or a literal retelling with a more original take.
Or complaining about the numerous amounts of Marvel movies. They always seem to complain about these things happening on the basis of originality.
Here is a big old false equivalency. The main problem with the Marvel movies isn't that they are unoriginal. It's that they are everywhere, and Disney keeps pumping them out. Whilst the Marvel movies are adaptations, they are usually different stories, whether that be because the studios behind them wanted to take a different direction, or they couldn't get the rights to certain characters to make the 100% accurate story. Now, if you meant that Disney focuses on Marvel movies rather than their own original works, you would have a stronger case for. However, there is also the abundance of original works that have or are about to come out from their home studio, Pixar, Lucasfilm, etc. This point too might also be null and void.
Now, I'm not saying that originality is a bad thing. Originality can go a long way. But to be somewhat fair, just because you're original doesn't mean you're good. And yes, I know that's a sequel to a long-running series, but the concept of Murder in Space is still technically original. Not a good movie, though.
Murder in Space is original? Huh. Oh, let's see here. Jason X, release date 2001. Let me search for something else here. Alien, release date 1979. Horror in space isn't an original concept regardless of being good or not. Hell, look at 1997's Event Horizon, which is also a bad movie, but also has death in space.
In fact, I say there's a lot of movies out there that, although not original, are still pretty good. Hell, we were just talking about Disney remakes. The originals aren't the original either. They're based on stories too. A good example of that is The Lion King, which is just based on the tragedy of Hamlet. And supposedly it's also a ripoff of Kimba the White Lion, but I call bullshit. Now, yeah, my argument kind of falls flat when you consider that, yeah, the movies aren't based on original ideals, but their takes on it are. A story about Spider-Man is not an original ideal, but it would be lying to say it's a straight adaptation of the comics. But to be fair, that's not really an argument against my argument. If anything, it supports it.
How do you jump from saying that there is an argument against your point to immediately saying the counter-argument proves your point? Need proofreading, my guy.
Harley Quinn is a great example of this, and I know there's a certain Bat character I could also use as an example, but I haven't seen a lot of Batman stuff. Her Suicide Squad appearance might not be a good character. In fact, it's not a good character at all. I think the fact that they make mental illness a funny haha quirk is kind of shitty. And yeah, I know this is from the same series where a guy beats up criminals and sends them to an insane asylum. But aside from the problematic aspects of Harley Quinn's character, if that was the only thing wrong with her, I probably wouldn't dislike her that much. The problem is, she's not very interesting, captivating, or funny. At best, she's annoying, and at worst, she's boring. And yeah, to be fair, I have not seen Birds of Prey. Maybe they make her character better there, I don't know. But I have seen a good interpretation of Harley Quinn before. The Harley Quinn show is a really good show. It's the first time in a long while I've been able to enjoy something Batman related. Now, in hindsight, this character seems to be very, very similar to the other interpretation. It is someone based on it, of course. But where the live action version makes a stale and boring cardboard cutout, the cartoon takes it and makes a fully developed character. Not only fully developed, but a character you would actually give a shit about. But what these characters do have in common is that they're both based on the original Harley Quinn in some way. And hell, it could be argued that the live action version is more original than the modern cartoon version. I mean, come on. We all know who's stealing the f***ing haircut here. But as stated earlier, originality does not make something better. Although the modern cartoon version is definitely less original, it's also better. Because in the new Harley Quinn show, originality is not that important.
You had me, and you lost me. You simultaneously understand the point against your argument, but you don't seem to use it to better your argument. I understand where you're coming from when you use the examples of Harley Quinn's character over the course of years, but that's another false equivalency. Apples to oranges, if you will. A character is merely a tool or item for the story to use in the plot or events to tell said story. You are comparing a person that is used to tell the story to a story. Not to mention, changing up plot points or story beats is more complicated than the traits or personality of a character. Furthermore, a change in character or how a character acts doesn't equate to how a story is original or not. The changes in a character do not automatically mean the story is fundamentally original. Going off of the Lion King 2019 remake, the three hyena characters are replaced by a singular character that was fundamentally different from the original. However, that character didn't change how the story was told at all. How you use a character in a story can change how the story progresses. Also, I'll agree with you on one thing. Originality isn't that important. But I think you're missing the point a little. Whilst I can see the same story over and over again, it would be nice and more interesting to see a different take on that story. I could just watch the same Romeo and Juliet over and over, or I could watch Titanic and get a new take on the same story. Ain't that funny how that works?
But, yet again, if you really wanted to counteract my argument, you could say that even though it isn't the original character, or even an original character at all, the interpretation is. You cannot say that this Harley Quinn is anything like the earlier cartoon version.
I'll give you this. You're giving your own counter-arguments. Unfortunately, it's based on a false equivalence.
They are completely two different characters at the end of the day. The thing that makes this character good is its new interpretation that is original. However, that would be severely missing my point. Here's another reason I kind of get pissy when people complain about Disney remakes that aren't out yet, even though most likely I'm not going to see them and most likely they aren't going to be good. The thing is, I want to see original interpretations of old ideals.
New interpretations of old ideals. Keep this in mind because the examples used break this point entirely.
Now, everyone, hold on to your seats. I'm about to give another one of those spicy hot takes. I don't like the original Lion King that much. Like, yeah, don't get me wrong, it's not a bad movie, but it's not exactly a movie I would call one of Disney's greatest. The first half has a lot of, the first half's pretty good, everyone can agree on that. But the second half kind of drags down, and I kind of wish there was a better version of this. I would very much like to see a new interpretation, even if it's not about fixing the second half and it's just an original interpretation. Now, you might be coming in and saying, we did get a new interpretation of The Lion King, and it was but it wasn't because it was unoriginal. No, it was just poorly written and also poorly shot.
So you completely missed the point of why the 2019 Lion King was not well received. Yes, it was unoriginal. It was a one-to-one remake of the 1990s movie. Whilst it wasn't a shot-by-shot adaptation, it was still the same plotline with the same characters with the same outcome. Minus, of course, the emotion from the actors because Disney went with the ultra-realistic animation over the cartoon style, the original, thus ruining the emotional impact of. So line changes were made, yes, but they never impacted the story. Was bad writing? I mean, for copy-paste plot lines, I suppose it's not the best, but it is copy-paste. And I wouldn't call this movie poorly shot. If anything, the 2019 Lion King has some excellent shots. But visuals aren't everything. They really aren't. Look to James Cameron's Avatar, which has amazing visuals, but the plot line is just Pocahontas X dancing with wolves. And it was blatantly obvious those were the movies Cameron took inspiration from. You can have great visuals, but if the plot line is just copy-paste, people are going to notice.
Like, I would personally want to know who decided that Can You Feel the Love Tonight should take place in, the middle of the f***ing day. But yet again, we can't just say that all interpretations or remakes of The Lion King would be a bad ideal, because there is things to fix in The Lion King. The problem with The Lion King isn't that it's unoriginal, it's that it's bad. An attempt to use realistic CGI to distract from the fact that it's not a good movie. Forgetting the fact that good CGI stopped being impressive a while ago. Like, wow, Disney, very impressive that you had all this money to pay animators with.
So you understand visuals aren't everything. That's good, but again, you missed the point of why people don't like the 2019 Lion King. It's not that the visuals were there to mask how bad the movie is. It's that the realistic visuals took away from the experience of a story that was already been told time and time again, the same way. And arguably because of those visual differences, the 2019 Lion King was brought down by the original.
Now, get ready for another spicy hot take. I might be going too far with this one. This one's really spicy. If you want an example of a good Disney remake, then look no further than Aladdin,
Aladdin suffers from, once again, being the same plotline with different visuals, ultimately taking away from the original story. Crow, for someone trying to say that originality isn't necessary, you pick the worst examples. You literally pick films that are one-to-one remakes, and all these examples are panned for being unoriginal and not living up to expectation. If you picked different movies that tackled the same subject matter, you'd have a better point. Megamind and Despicable Me came out the same year and tackled the same subject matter. A villain character that would come to realize they don't want to be the bad guy anymore. Both plots are the same, but neither movies are bad. At least in my opinion.
Like, no, I'm not joking. I'm not you all. I genuinely think the Aladdin remake is a good movie. In fact, I would say it's almost on par with the original. Sure, if I wanted to throw some criticisms, I would say that they need to get a better main lead for the role of Aladdin, because I don't think he did a very good job here. And yeah, not all the CGI is great, but I don't care about CGI that much. And the ending, oh good lord, this movie definitely needed like another 30 minutes, because the ending feels so rushed. And I feel like anytime it tries to emulate Bollywood, it kind of falls flat. But aside from all of that, it's a pretty good remake that does fix a lot of problems I had with the original movie.
It fixed problems you had with the original movie. I mean, you have my attention.
Jasmine and the Sultan, although not as fun as characters as the original, do get a bit more depth that makes them at least more interesting.
More depth. How do they have more depth? That point needs a little more explaining. I'm very confused. If you're bringing up that political shit in that movie, we need to have a talk. I'm sorry, that doesn't equate to originality or depth, my guy.
This also applies to Jafar, even though, to be fair, I'll take the original any day. There was a scene where he talked about his upbringing and how he was a thief just like Aladdin. And sure, I'll take the bombastic and fun original version, but this version is still good and interesting because, well, he actually feels like a real person.
Okay, I can understand where you are coming from with the first piece. Backstory can make a character interesting, but again, an interesting character doesn't substitute a one-to-one remake. Going back to the 2019 Lion King, the hyena trio is replaced with a new side villain, but that character didn't change the overall plot or how the movie was perceived. The same would go for Jafar in the new Aladdin. He was changed, but not enough to change the overall plot. Crow, I think you brought up your earlier example of Harley Quinn to say that if a character is different, it doesn't matter if the story is different? This line of thought could work if you compare different films with the same plot, not one-to-one remakes, because different films with the same plot will have different characters and have different ways these characters act in a situation. Where a one-to-one remake is just that, one-to-one remake, even with character changes, it still doesn't change the plot. Now you could have a point if you, again, picked non-one-to-one remakes from Disney, like Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland, Maleficent, Pete's Dragon. Those are movies that do change how the story works and the overall plot of the story. But you choose the remakes that are made literally to just be the same movie. So your point is basically null and void.
I think if you want a more fun movie, then you'd go watch the original Aladdin. It's a lot more fun there. But if you want a more slightly interesting movie or a slightly more interesting take on it, then go watch the remake.
You haven't given enough information for me to understand what you mean by more interesting. You only gave 2 examples, one of which lacked examples. Oddly enough, I'd be fine with 1 point if it was backed up heavily, which you didn't do in this case. Not really a problem with your opinion, just a flaw in explaining your argument.
But don't get me wrong, this movie isn't, devoid of fun. There's still some fun in it. I think some of the musical numbers are definitely better than the original.
I find that a little hard to believe considering the limitations of live-action film over animation. Perhaps small clips could help back up this point?
And as if the hole I just dug up for myself wasn't deep enough, I will have to say, despite Will Smith's genie looking like a sleep paralysis demon, I will have to say, I would be very lucky to have a sleep paralysis demon as charming as him. In fact, I would go as far to say that I kinda like this genie more than the original.
Pardon, nigga?
Now, don't get me wrong, the original version is good, just not as good. Although the original genie has a lot of emotional moments that definitely hit much harder after, he died. But despite that, I really don't like the pop culture references. They come as really dated now and even back then when they were relevant. Although, to be fair, I wasn't alive when they were relevant. But even back as a kid, I didn't find them funny. And as I grow older, it's not one of those jokes I go like, Oh yeah, that's kind of funny. And that's a good chunk of his humor and personality, and it's not very good. Like, I get it. It's, you know, Robin Williams humor. That's what he does, but I guess I'm just not a fan of Robin Williams humor. However, the Will Smith version gets some additional depth, like most of the characters in the movie, and is overall more likable. Like, I feel like I could only watch the original Genie from afar, but the new Genie I feel like I could be friends with. He has this chill but upbeat attitude that I just really like, and I was surprised that his emotional moments hit hard as well. If you haven't seen this movie, and if you have Disney Plus or something else, I recommend go giving it a watch. It's not as bad as you think it is.
With this subjective criticism again, you are using the differences in characters to make the point that originality isn't important. To keep the same story with different characters again can work as a point. If you weren't using one-to-one remakes, there are plenty of movies that generally have the same plot with different characters, yet they still manage to find their own originality. With these Disney remakes you picked, they have minor character changes that affect nothing. It's like I said earlier, the way you tell the story matters, original or not. It's how you tell the story. And I've already listed examples of films that have similar plots and plot structures but are handled differently. They aren't original, but they are told in their own unique way. That is the key to avoiding a lack of originality.
But to go back to my original point, this movie isn't very original, yet it's very, very good. Sure, you could argue all day that it's not as good as the original, but should that really matter? I'm a person who watches movies like anyone else, to have a good time. And sure, an interesting plot that's complex helps too, because I can talk about it in my mind all day. And with saying that, I think Aladdin is a fun enough movie. And the movie ends up being worthwhile, not only because it's fun, but it's an interesting take that, although it makes some new flaws, also has some new fixes.
Subjective criticism that I still can't get behind because of lack of examples and Crow's points. Maybe I'm just stubborn or something isn't getting through my thick raccoon skull, but I really can't get behind the idea that originality isn't important, going off of your video at least. The poor choices in points and lack of strong examples basically leaves me quite off-put by your stance.
And I think there's a lot of Disney movies out there that could really use a remake. I mean, yeah, maybe don't make them all live action, make some of them, you know, animated. That would be nice.
Do you mean like the quote-unquote live action Lion King, which had only one real shot that was on site, the rest being CG, and that they paid big bucks for, and that you pointed out was animated earlier in this video? Animated or not, a one-to-one remake will still have its issues, and the audience will have them too.
But I think I've made my point very clear that originality is not important.
I have come up with better examples that would actually boost your point instead of going off of the Disney remakes that change almost nothing.
It's what you do with those concepts and ideals that matters. Using old ideals again and reinventing them isn't a bad ideal. In fact, I would say it's somewhat original. Totally original ideals are fine, but I wouldn't mind seeing old ones get revisited and reworked.
Again, your argument would be stronger with different examples, not the Disney remakes.
And yeah, I totally forgot to talk about sequels. Don't worry, this video is definitely getting a part 2 just for sequels alone. And a part 3 to talk about video games as well.
If that's the case, then I look forward to seeing these videos. I want to see what you have to say, and I hope you do improve your content whilst doing it. Deviant Crow, if you're watching this, no pun intended, but there are seeds of good ideas you have here. I just wish your points were backed up with stronger examples and perhaps give in-depth explanations to certain points. I know there isn't a rule book to commentaries, as with most media, there isn't a rule book, but I hope this video gives you something to work with in the future. I know I can come off as a little harsh in this video, but that is out of a genuine desire to see you grow as a commentator in the CC. To the audience, I hope I provided a good counter-argument, but if not, I am always willing to accept criticism of any kind. So if you want to, you can leave a comment or even a video of your own, who knows. No commentary chains though, that is a big no-no. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you guys on the flip side.
To the town of Outfield rode a stranger one fine day. Hardly spoke to folks around him, didn't have too much to say. No one dared to ask his business, no one dared to make a slip. The stranger there among them had a big iron on his hip. Big iron on his hip. Big iron on his hip. Big iron on his hip.
Also, a literal side note, there is a comment chain from my script checker asking for gay sex. I hate you all.